Hello, everybody. It is Friday, and that means we are exhuming the X-Files here on the Outpost Unknown YouTube channel. You know what to do. Hit that like and subscribe. Follow us on our weekly journey at going through every episode of the X-Files. My name's Matthew. He is Jeremy.
Hey, everybody.
Tonight, we're putting on our masks. We're going to avoid getting pustulized by some gooey exploding sores. So we are talking, the episode is called Emasculata, directed by Rob Bowman, written by Chris Carter and Howard Gordon. This is episode 22 of season 2, episode 46 overall. So I had no recollection of this episode. Had you, anything you remembered about this episode from when you were a kid?
No, I didn't actually remember this one at all, but
I will say, I didn't realize what this was until I started watching it, obviously, like what the subject matter was going to be. And I really like sort of outbreaky type stuff. Not in real life, obviously. We all lived through COVID. It wasn't fun. But in terms of like media, one of the things I really remember from my childhood that always stuck with me is for all the kids out there listening, they used to do these things on television called miniseries. And what you would do is you would adapt an author, like say, oh, Stephen King, he had a million of these, right? And it'd be like ABC, your 4 night event, of the Stephen King's The Stand or whatever. And I remember that very first episode of Stephen King's The Stand when the outbreak occurs and it's showing how one person is going and infecting everybody until it basically kills the whole world. And I always thought that was terrifying and you know just a really cool idea. Did you remember watching The Stand? Were you impacted by that as much as I was that first episode?
the book a little bit more. The television show was okay, I guess. What I remember most about it was MOON. That spells moon. That's about it.
Yeah, the actual television event wasn't great, but that very first episode when they first show how the contagion kind of spreads, I always thought that was something that really captured my imagination. So we got something similar here. We're gonna talk F emasculata. So what happens in the prologue of this one?
Something really gross. So buckle up, y'all. Starts out with a bug collector. He's in a rainforest collecting, beetles, and he sees a bunch of vultures, and he's like, "All right, time to go flip this corpse over and get some more bug things." He chases off all of these vultures off of this corpse, and it decides to immediately start like popping this moving pustule.
Yeah,
It's in this body of a pig or so. Oh, so it's so gnarly, gross.
it looks
But
really
this
gross.
this this big throbbing, like 3 inches across thing, and he's just like, I'm just gonna pop this into my open mouth.
What is that show, like Dr. Pimple Popper or something? That's what I can imagine. I think Jeff would like this episode because he loves that throbbing pustule stuff and popping it open. He'd probably dig this one.
He's nasty, but all right. So he does, and then the next scene you see, or the next minute you see him calling for a medevac. He's got this huge pustule on his face. He's obviously dying very, very, very quickly. And then 7 hours after that, a bunch of Latino gorillas are wandering through the woods looking for him, and they do stumble upon his body. And then we get the title screen.
Yeah, my notes for this was gross opening scene exclamation point. This was probably like the grossest opening scene of any X-Files that I can remember that we've watched thus far. The makeup looks so good. It looks so real. I think they had like Madagascar hissing cockroaches crawling all over it, whatnot, but it just had a visceralness to it that just was like, ugh. And it doesn't end here. It keeps
Like,
going.
like so the next scene that we get is some guy in solitary confinement gets a mail delivered to him. I didn't know that was a thing. But the guard is like, sometimes they send fruitcake. So he immediately rips into it. It's just this bloody newspaper on the outside of a ham hock. And then
Were you as confused as I was when this happened? I was like, "What? when you're in like a prison, well, I assume like a federal prison. I don't know if that's what he was in.
It was
He
pretty
must have been.
clean. Yeah.
They like check your mail. They don't just let people send packages in without them like scanning it or looking in to see what's in there. If you get like a big package, they're gonna check to see what's inside that. And I was like, how did they not see this giant like severed leg of a pig or something all bloody? It was very strange to me. They kind
I
of explain it later, but
kind of, and I could buy it because of the well, we'll get to it. Um anyway, shortly afterwards, all of a sudden he's infected and they incinerate his body and they send a couple of dudes. That this whole part of it was really really rushed because they had a couple of like prison inmates that were also in charge of turning out rooms. So
mhm.
they must have had some sort of privilege, but they apparently had planned to escape. So, but not until they, you know, touched this guy's sheets and his ham collection.
One of the dudes, I was like, I recognize the guy with the long hair, the convict with the long hair. Do you recognize where that guy is from?
I do not.
So there's a show that I absolutely love. It's called The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. That is Pete Hutter. The guy's
Ow.
like Pete's Piece. That is him, and I was like, oh, I looked him up on IMDb, and he's really good in this as well.
But well, I mean, they make some sort of passing thing that they're gonna tonight's laundry night, right? And I guess anyway, um, what is it? Dude gets some free ham and is super mad about it.
Well, it is a weird cut because they talk about how they're going to escape, and then the very next scene they've already escaped,
Yeah.
and so you don't actually get to see the escape. I guess it's not important
No, it just
necessarily.
immediately jumps to Asac Slater from fucking Breaking Bad just showing
Yep.
up, and he's a U.S. Marshal, and the FBI is sent in by Skinner,
Yeah.
and like,
Mulder's like, "What the fuck are we doing here? Like, what's? I don't understand why we're
well,
here."
yeah, or what was it? Was this the one where Scully's like, "Why are they sending us on this busy work? This is not FBI work, so why are we even here?" And
I
they
think
start questioning the whole.
Yeah, I think this is the one where Mulder questions, and then later on, there's another episode later on that we'll get to where Scully then questions why we're doing it. So there's a whole lot. The back end of season two, just as a general thing, has done a very poor job of sort of explaining exactly where the X Files are, like how they're viewed by Skinner. Like early on, Skinner, like, he backs him 100% on the X Files and searching for it. But then it's kind of like, are they are they in trouble now? Are they not supposed to be looking into the X Files, and that's why they're complaining about being sent on all these cases? So it's unclear exactly what the status of the X Files is at this point.
But they split up. Mulder goes with Asac Slater and to track these two escapees down because he's aware that they might be infected, and apparently they can't do anything right because every major decision that happens with the manhunt goes to Mulder, who really shouldn't have even been there in the first place, which I found kind of interesting. But they just listen to him, so all right.
Yeah.
Then Scully goes to the prison to figure out what's going on there, and she finds a prison in quarantine. She meets with like this local guy who claims he's from the CDC, and then proceeds to do some of the dumbest shit a medical professional in a quarantine procedure like can do.
Yeah.
She won't get let in to see the bodies. So, but she sees dudes running around in full hazmat suits and like, bags over their heads, rubber gloves. She just goes down to the incinerator room and just like starts cutting open the body bags that they have sealed down there because they're going to burn up all of these guys, and then starts playing with like the pustules. And this dude comes in, the guy that she was talking to from this, the supposed CDC earlier, and he's like, "No, no, no, get away from that!" And he gets blasted in the mouth. This death guy's pustule. It's so fucking gross because they
It looks
lay it on
wet.
thick.
Yeah. it's wet and it's just gooey on their face, and they're like, I mean, it happens to
Ugh,
multiple people throughout this whole thing.
it does.
And I did make a note in that sequence, though. I said in caps, "Look, someone wearing a mask in 1995 during a deadly outbreak." And then immediately when that guy comes in, Scully pulls her mask down to talk to the guy, and I was like, "Oh,"
Mhm.
and it's so strange now that we've lived through COVID in those like 2 years, how looking back at some of this stuff now, it's you sort of see it's like, well, that wouldn't have happened that way, and it just seems so weird because we're so ingrained now of like, okay, sick, put on the mask, walk around, talk through the mask, do whatever you need to do through the mask. And seeing Scully wear it and then immediately pull it down as the pustules are being sprayed out, it was weird.
And then she got that guy killed. Like, not
Yep.
taking this seriously, she ended up getting that guy killed. It was so, and she just doesn't care about it, but alright. Um, it gets back to, like, one of the 2 guy, or they're figuring out where there are these 2 escapees are at. One of them is infected really bad, the other one seems to be doing just fine, and they're making their way back to the okay, still healthy guy's, like, street girlfriend or whatever, cons
Yeah.
have waiting on the outside for him.
Yeah. You always have a
And
woman, his baby mama, sitting there waiting for him.
mhm, she ends up getting blasted in the face with pus too.
Well, it's so
Um,
funny because he's like, "We need to bring my friend inside." Like, he shows up, and of course, she jumps on him, and she's making out with him, and she's like, "I'm never gonna let them take you again." He shouldn't be at her place, as we see. That'll be like the first place they go check. But then it's so hilarious because he's like, I mean, I got somebody with me, and she walks over to the car, and she sees this guy, and he's got pustules, pulsing pustules all over his face, and I'll just call him Pete. Pete's like, we got to bring him inside, and she just turns and gives like the most what the fuck look possible towards him, and then it cuts. It's like
no,
that girl doesn't want him in that house.
but she lets him in, and she is solely responsible for taking care of his health at that point, which is how she gets blasted. And like hers was the worst of them. Like they soaked her
Oh yeah.
with.
Oh
Oh, it
yeah.
was so gross. Um, God, what is they end up finding out that the CDC is not actually in charge of the prison quarantine, that it's some pharma company that's running
Yes. Pink
this as a
Pharma.
test. Uh, they like the cigarette smoking man ends up getting involved and talking to Mulder about it, or was he just talking to Skinner?
Well, see, Mulder goes to talk to Skinner late at night because he's like, "I'm sorry to disturb you this late," and it's clear that it's night. It's dark. You can see out the window, like Skinner's back. It's like dark, and then Mulder walks in and he sees that Skinner's been talking to the cigarette smoking man in his office when Mulder shows up.
And he- yeah, and he starts raising hell about why they got sent in the first place.
Yeah.
And the cigarette smoking man's like, well, the American public can't know about this. We sent you guys basically to lie about a lot of this stuff
hmm
and help us cover it up.
He has that
And it was,
great line where he says, "We control the disease by controlling the information," which that hits a lot closer to home after after living through COVID than it probably did back then. But it's very interesting because it's this sort of this what the government does, right? It's, hey, this is what's going on when it might actually not be. Actually, there are a million people dying, but pay no attention. Look at this over here. So yeah, that hit close to home, that line.
but it's also them covering down for a pharmaceutical company. Like this wasn't a
Yeah.
governmental fuck up, which I found weird, but okay,
Yeah,
whatever.
they do this. It was kind of a convoluted explanation. They say that the dude who Scully lets get blasted in the face, he actually works for this thing called Pink Pharmaceuticals. And from what I understand, based on how it was described, is they were trying to basically get past human trials or fast track trials of some sort of drug or something. So they were using the prison as like an experiment. So they sent this dude the severed ham to get him sick. The question is like, I don't understand what the point, like where was the drug to cure it? Like it
Right.
it's never explained as to why this would even be a thing that pink pharmaceuticals would do.
But by God, they did it, and it costed 18 people their lives.
Yeah.
So, what was it? The boyfriend or the dude dies. What is it? One of the two escapees, the infected one, dies almost immediately after blasting the girlfriend in the face. Then Asac Schrader and the gang bust in. They arrest her. They take this crying kid who they must have scared the shit out of because that kid was just bawling during that
Oh yeah.
scene.
How do we make that kid cry?
Just scare the shit out of him. Um, and they said, well, basically, they find out that the boyfriend is infected, that he's at a bus station and he's trying to go to Toronto. We cut back to Scully, and she's working with the scientist, trying to figure out whether she's infected through some convoluted, like strapping a beetle to her arm
Yeah,
test
there's
thing.
a whole thing where he mentions that this bug that there this guy, I can't remember what the name was. I remember Torrance because it was clearly an homage to Jack Torrance from The Shining or something. Chris Carter thought he was being clever, but the rainforest person at the very beginning that dies, his name was something Torrance. Like I don't know, we'll just say Jack Torrance. Jack Torrance, and then the guy in the prison is also named Jack Torrance, and then you find out a convoluted reason as to why that is at the end, but this dude, like it does not make any sense because there's a bug that has a parasite in it, and that parasite is what actually gets into people, and then it sort of the host, that's what creates the spores and it spreads that way. It was very confusing how they were trying to make this whole thing work.
But
Was it
they
just like
did
COVID?
communicate. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, they want all of that convoluted stuff was basically just to say that it you don't get infected unless you get blasted with a pustule. Like it's not an airborne infection. It's actually a
Yeah.
parasite that births itself inside of this pustule, explodes on you, and then gets you sick.
Within
So
36 hours because
and
everyone's
they,
dead.
and they figure all of this out, and then Scully does this little test, and then right at the tail end of the test that she ends up ending up having to finish, the scientist that she's working with has a pustule like on his neck and starts dying. He falls over, she runs over and grabs him as she collapses, and like her face and her mouth is about 4 inches from this pustule, and it's just open while she's talking to this guy. It's like
Tongue
you're
that pustule.
so she's she's not practicing. I wrote it like 4 different times in my notes. She's not practicing good quarantine procedure.
Right. Well, even the dude, when he first shows up and he shows her that he's infected, I'm like, how is this guy not quarantined? Why is he not quarantining himself? He's just wandering around this prison. Now, I know they kind of say, like, well, the entire prison itself is under quarantine, but still, you wouldn't just be wandering around potentially infecting other people like Scully. Like,
But
what?
this
It's weird.
this is the guy that during the zombie movie he's gonna hide the fact that he has a bite, and then
100%.
everybody finds out too late. Like he's that
Yeah,
guy
he
clearly.
is. Yeah, that's a good metaphor there. Yeah.
And so, but somehow Scully doesn't get blasted like as this guy dies, which happens 2 different times, I believe, earlier in this episode to a couple of different people. So great, great for them. Um, what is it? They end up doing this weird bus standoff thing with Mulder and the pustule guy that's trying to leave.
Hmm.
And it's weird too because like Mulder's just like I'm just gonna sneak up behind him and put a gun to the back of his head, telling Asac Schrader how he's gonna take this guy down, and he just kind of shrugs his shoulders, and says, all right, we won't get anybody in position, we won't get a sniper team, nothing. We just that sounds good, you
Yeah.
do you.
Everyone listens to Mulder.
Then the scientist guy dies. They end up like burning his body in the incinerator. At the same time, the guy turns himself in to the cops, like lets the his hostage on the bus go because the whole right it wasn't a good takedown of Mulder. Like both him and the bus driver are staring at him as he comes out of the bathroom.
Yeah.
And he immediately knows the jig is up. Like there wasn't any time to play it cool. He ends up letting the kid go, but Schrader's team shoots him through the window before he can get like any evidence. At the same time, Scully is trying or telling him that you need this guy to talk so that America can know about this. Because
Mhm.
apparently, like her being a FBI special agent and a physician at the same time isn't enough to like go
What
public and be believed about it.
Well, what's interesting is earlier on in the episode, Mulder is the one that wants to tell the public immediately everything that's going on. And he has that thing with first he's arguing with the cigarette smoking man about it. And then he starts kind of arguing with Scully about it because he goes, "Well, we got to tell the public someone might die if we do not." And then Scully kind of sided with Cigarette Smoking Man's argument, even though she wasn't there, because Cigarette Smoking Man's argument was, "Look, it'll be a panic if we tell people that this is out there. People will be freaking out all over the place." And that's when he says we control the disease by controlling the information. And then when Mulder calls Scully the very next scene because she's stuck in quarantine over there, and she says the same thing. She's like, "If we tell, like, someone might die if we do tell." And so there's this whole sort of like, I guess, undercurrent in this episode of like what is the correct thing to do in this situation. Should the government tell the people what is going on, or should they keep it under wraps and try to contain it and sort of make it go away? But yeah, eventually Scully turns around on that because everybody is dead. Like everybody dies within 36 hours of this, and the doctor that she essentially let die, she's like, "I mean, if you want any evidence, you're gonna have to get a statement from this guy because he's gonna drop dead." But of course, they shoot and kill him before he can spit it out.
Ew. Like, literally.
I wrote on here that dude, Pete, was very pustule positive. That was my note.
Pustule positive Pete. Okay, so and all of the evidence falls apart. They end up running into Skinner again, and Skinner, for some reason, is heavily covering for Big Pharma. And then the last note that I had is this episode was purely just a reminder to the audience that there's an overarching like conspiracy going on with the government and other entities, and we like it didn't really have a message, I think, other than to tell us that towards the end of the season we're going to start running into this conspiracy theory crap, and this is just to remind you that it's a thing without telling you what we're going to be doing in the next few episodes.
Yeah, I thought one interesting aspect of this is Cigarette Smoking Man shows up, but this is not an alien myth arc episode. They don't give any sort of hint that this, I don't know, this pathogen or whatever that's going around has anything to do with aliens. It's literally just evil big pharma testing on prisoners for reasons that they don't really explain. Because, like I said, they basically state, "Oh yeah, 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 they're trying to like, fast track and skip different FDA trials and stuff like that." But for what? Like, what is the drug that they are trying to skip? I mean, all they did was send a pathogen to a bunch of prisoners and kill them. So, like, I don't know what that was all about. Um, yeah. So, I one note that I did on here or have on here is that the dude Pete on the bus, he was acting his ass off. Like he was
He was.
really good, just freaking out about the pustules. And he has that moment where he's like, "I'm gonna die, aren't I?" Like that realization that there's no coming back from being pustule positive. Um, so Skinner mentions to Mulder. I think that everyone they're always 3 steps ahead of him, and Skinner has that comment at the very end. He's like, "I'm saying this as your friend. Watch your back. This is just the beginning." And my question is, just the beginning of what? Like, is Skinner referencing more big pharma episodes down the line? Like, you're gonna find out more evil big pharma, or is this just like more shit's gonna get thrown your way, sort of thing? Like, what did you think Skinner meant by that line? This is just the beginning.
I think that was, or that's what caused me or spurred me to write on that last note, was that the last few episodes, the last 4 episodes, like they had a brief one where it involved aliens just a little bit, but this was th- there's some of these episodes that I feel needs to remind the audience of, it's not always the monster of the week, it's not the freak show stuff, it's not just alien, or there's this conspiracy behind the government to do A, B, and C for reasons that we don't entirely understand. And while this episode didn't heavily lean on that like ones in the near future, it just needed to remind us that, hey, you got some stuff coming up in the next few episodes that you need to remember, that, oh yeah, right. Cigarette smoking man, there's a conspiracy for reasons. Like, that's what
Yeah.
this episode and that line felt like to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I can buy that. Just a couple other notes I had on here. I did like the scene with the girlfriend when Mulder is talking to her and she makes the line, or he's trying to tell her like, "Hey, there's a like uh pathogen like that's going around and people might die, like an outbreak, so to speak." And she makes that line where she's just like, "Well, I didn't see anything about that on TV." Just sort of going back to what Cigarette Smoking Man was saying, is like, you control the information, no one knows it. They'll only believe it if they're seeing stuff on TV about it. And then she's like, if you won't tell the truth, or if you won't tell the truth about this, then why should I tell you the truth about all of this? Which I thought was a well written line between the two of them, because Mulder's like conflicted through this whole thing as to what he should and should not do, which I thought was kind of neat. And then the scientist who dies from Pink Pharma, he does tell Scully that he's trying to get the truth out now, because he's like, this is not an isolated incident. This happens all the time. So,
Yeah.
um,
Right.
yeah. So, what did you think of F. Emasculata?
After coming off these last few episodes that were mostly a disappointment, I actually really liked it. It was well put together. There was good acting. Nobody really phoned it in. There was some hokey shit with Scully that I don't particularly like, because she was so by the book, and then treating what has to be like the worst exposure she's had since like the glowing bug thing out in the woods.
Yeah.
Like, she didn't take it seriously at all, and it costed one scientist his fucking life because she just had to cut open a body bag. But other than that, I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good.
Yeah, I thought this was a cool watch. I agree with you 100%. I was watching, was like, why is Scully not? I mean, she wears a mask in one scene, and then like never again. So a lot of that stuff was kind of, I just got to roll with it. But yeah, I agree with you. I liked the feel of this episode. How I loved how gory it was. I wasn't expecting
Oh,
it to be
so
as
gross.
gory. It looked nasty. The makeup on these pustule people was way better than like the makeup in Dodcom, for example, like the old age makeup. This makeup really held up, I thought, over the
Mhm.
past 30 years. And so yeah, this was a pretty cool episode. Thumbs up for me on this one. Some fun facts about it. Oh, F. emasculata, by the way, they mentioned that that's the name of the bug or something. I don't remember what the F stands for, but the name of or the episode is just based on the bug that they found out in the rainforest. And it says, while F. emasculata and pink pharmaceuticals are fictitious, the show was inspired by the fact that pharmaceutical companies do send researchers the world over looking for unique plants or animals that might prove to have medicinal use. Initially, the show's producers were worried about releasing the episode around the same time as the film Outbreak, a movie in which a deadly contagious disease spreads in a California town. In the end, however, they realized that the two entities were substantially different from one another. Outbreak, by the way, it's got Dustin Hoffman in it. That's a cool movie. So if anyone's interested in seeing something similar to this, I recommend Outbreak. That's pretty cool. Notably, the Smoking Man appears in this episode. His appearance in standalone or Monster of the Week episodes was unusual, as Chris Carter preferred not to mix the show's overarching mythology with its self contained episodes. And the exploding pustules were carefully rigged to burst on command. Makeup supervisor Toby Landala created a device that was connected to the fake sores by discrete tubing. When the device was activated, the sores would explode. Filming the scenes with this device was particularly arduous, as Landala later noted, quote, "In one scene, I was jammed underneath one of the bus seats with these extras basically stepping on my head." The X-Files director Frank Spotnitz remarked, "When we saw the pustule bursting on film, we just laughed because it was just so over-the-top grotesque." And yeah, it is definitely gross. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is Emasculata. Stay tuned next week. We are going to be talking an episode called Soft Light, which is one I distinctly remember from my childhood. So I'm excited to talk about that. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. And we will see you next Friday here on Outpost Unknown for Exhuming the X-Files.